As I was looking over this week's homework, I noticed there were a few problems that were consistently missed by students, so I wanted to make a quick video to go over those problems since we are testing this week and hopefully clear up any misconceptions. Let's get started. So the first one I noticed was on Mondays. Not a lot of people missed it, but enough people to make me want to go over it with everyone. So you are comparing 2/5 and 6/15. So there are different ways you can compare this, but I believe for this one, the easiest would be to make common denominators, because 5 going to 15 is pretty easy. So if I'm thinking about 2/5, if I want to change that to be out of 15, I would multiply it by 3. That means I'd have to multiply the top by 3, which gives me 6/15, which is the same fraction as what we are comparing. So that tells me that these two fractions are equivalent. They are equal to each other. The next problem I noticed we missed was a Tuesday problem. It was 2 1/5 minus 1 2/3. Even though subtraction will not be on our test, since it's not one of our 6th grade standards, we still want to keep reviewing these concepts because they will come back in your mathematical career. So the first thing when we're thinking about actually subtracting is we know that in subtraction and addition, you have to have common denominators. So when I see 3 and 5, I automatically think we need to change this to 15. So if I have 1/5 and I'm wanting it to have a denominator of 15, I would have to multiply by 3, which was similar to actually the last problem. So that means I need to multiply the top by 3. So now I have 3/15. You're going to do the same thing with 2/3. You're trying to make it out of a 15th. So I would think 3 times 5 is what's going to give me 15. So that means what I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So I've got to multiply this by 5 as well because we've got to keep it balanced. So that would give me 10/15. So now I would rewrite the problem as 2 3/15 minus 1 10/15. But then I noticed something again, that I can't do 3/15 minus 10/15. I would end up with a negative number. So we actually need to borrow, or some of the students like to create improper fractions. So I'm going to go with creating the improper fraction and then subtracting. So if I have 2 times 15 would give me 30, plus the 3 on top would give me 33/15. I'm going to do the same thing with the other one. 1 times 15 gives me 15, plus the 10 makes 25. So I have 25/15. And now we can actually just subtract those. 33 minus 25 would give me 8/15. And you don't have to simplify that. That is in simplest form. So sometimes making subtraction into improper fractions actually makes the problem easier. Also on Tuesday's section of the homework, I noticed some people started this word problem, but never finished it. And a few got really close but made a small error. So I just wanted to go over it to make sure we all understand what this question is asking. So it's saying Sarah has 2/3 of a gallon of blue paint, 7/12 gallon of red paint, and she has a total of 2 1/8 gallon. How many gallons are neither red nor blue? So a lot of you got this first step right. You added your blue paint and your red paint together. So I would think I need to do 2/3 plus 7/12. But once again, we're talking about adding, so we have to have common denominators. Because remember when we talked about how 2/3, it's kind of like a label. Those are thirds, and 7/12, that label. They're not the same. But I can change these thirds into 12. So I can think 2/3, I want it to be a 12. That would be multiplying by 4. So I would do the same thing on the top, and that would give me 8/12. So now I can do 8/12 plus 7/12, which would give me 15/12. Or, simplified, would be 1 3/12. So now we have a subtraction problem. I had 2 1/8 minus the 1 3/12, which actually could be I'm actually going to simplify this even further and simplify it down to 1/4, because right here this could simplify down to divide by 3, divide by 3. That would give me that 1/4. So now I have 2 1/8 minus 1 1/4, but once again we don't have those common denominators. So, but I can change 1/4 to an 8. So 1/4 times 2 would give me the 8, so I need to do that as stops as well, so it'd be 2/8. So once again, we're going to change this now to 2/8. But I can't subtract these. We're having that issue again where we're having to borrow. We have a 1 here and a 2 here, and 1 minus 2 would give me a negative. So I'm going to make these improper again. So 2 times 8 gives me 16, plus that 1 is 17. So I have 17/8 minus 1 times 8 is 8, plus the 2 is 10. 8. So I have 17/8 minus 10/8 would tell me I have 7/8 left over. And that would be your final answer because it's already in simplest form. On Thursday's homework section, I saw a few little errors that I talked about on the review video, but I'm going to talk about on here as well. So when you're multiplying fractions and you have a whole number and a fraction, you cannot just multiply the numerator and the denominator both by the whole. You have to create a fraction from the whole number. And we talked about last week that to make any whole number a fraction, you just simply have to put it over 1, because if I rewrite this as 6/1, it still represents I have 6 wholes. So now you can multiply numerator and numerator, which would make 12. Denominator and denominator, which would make 3. And then simplify, which 12 divided by 3 gives me 4. Okay, you're going to do the same thing on this next one. You've got to put this 4 has to have a 1 underneath it, because we need it to be a fraction. Same thing again, denominator or numerator times numerator gives me 8. Denominator times denominator gives me 5, so I have 8/5. I've got to think about how many times will 5 go in 8. It'll go in there once with 3 left over, so I have 1 3/5. Okay, so we are not, this is a no, do not do this. I do not change this to 6/6 times 2/3, because 6/6 is actually a 1 whole. We don't have just 1, we have 6, so this is no, don't do that. And the last thing I saw on the homework that some people were getting confused on was the division. It may be because we had just finished our discussion with division and you're still wrapping your brain around the problems. So there are 2 problems I wanted to look at. One of them was the 6 divided by 1/3. And I also want to look at 8/9 divided by 4. They look very similar, but they actually turn out very different. So we talked about this week that we always want to change our whole numbers to fractions, and we talked about writing that over 1, because 6 divided by 1 is still just 6, so it's just a different form of how to write 6. And then we talked about we are going to change the division into multiplication, which is the opposite. So we are going to take the reciprocal of 1/3, which would be 3 in this problem. So then I really just have 6/1 times 3/1, which really is also just 6 times 3, which will give me 18. And that's your final answer. Simplest form, no need to do anything else. Because remember we talked about if you have 6 items of something, of chocolate bars, you have 6 chocolate bars, and you divide them into thirds, how many thirds would you have? You would have a lot more thirds than you did wholes, which is why it's 18. So now we have 8/9 divided by 4. So if I think about this backwards, so when I did a whole number divided by a fraction, it got bigger. But this time I'm taking a fraction and I'm dividing it into 4 sections. So it should get smaller because I'm breaking this down even further. So once again, we talked about changing this to a multiplication problem. So I have 8/9 times. I have to think of 4 as 4/1. So the reciprocal of 4/1 would be 1/4. And then I just multiply straight across. So I have 8, 9 times 4 is 36. And now I can also notice, oh, well, 4 goes into 8 and 4 goes into 36, so I can divide both of them by 4. This would give me 2, divide this by 4, 9. So it would be 2/9 would be the final answer for this one. Well, that's all that I noticed really in the homework that needed to be addressed. I hope this helped you maybe clarify some misconceptions. You will get your papers back on Tuesday. If you have not turned in your homework, please do so as soon as possible. Parents, you can see if they've turned their homework in the grade book.